Rishi Sunak's tyrannical energy bill receives another approval from Parliament, and the British government prepares to arrest those who oppose the net zero agenda. Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first video of the day. We're going to be talking about what's been happening in Parliament over the last couple of days. The energy bill continues to go through different stages. We had the third reading, and for those in case you haven't been following what's been going on with this new energy bill, the existing energy bill, which has been debated for a while, we have all the updates in this video. We're going to explain what happened last night, yesterday in Parliament, and how tyrannical this dangerous policy is going to be, because Rishi Sunak's government are going to be telling the police to arrest every single one of you if you do not obey when it comes to net zero. Now, what's going on? Let's talk about this. So, the energy bill, they finished the third reading. They had another vote in the House, and 280 MPs voted yes. Only 19 MPs voted no, and now of course it's going to go through the next stage, and it's going to go through eventually anyway, but only 19 members of Parliament were brave enough to rebel against this vote. Now, I do want to, before we get into the details of what's been going on, I want to give massive credit and praise every single one of these MPs, from Andrew Bridgen and of course Gregory Campbell, Philip Davies, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, Richard Drax, Sir Ian Duncan Smith, Paul Gervan, we got Carla Lockhart, Craig McKinley, Carl McCartney, Ian Paisley, John Redwood, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Gavin Robinson, Jim Shannon, Henry Smith, Sir Desmond Swain, and Sammy Wilson. Well done to every single one of you who have actually decided to go with your principle instead of the wave of the political consensus. Now, let's not forget, all this started with when the net zero program became legislation, thanks to Theresa May, our former Prime Minister, who decided to make this a legal obligation for every single government after her to do. So she became the queen of chaos, and at the time there was no scrutiny over any of this, and everyone basically just obeyed. The only person who rebelled was Donald J. Trump, and he even withdrew from the Paris agreement, which was the foundation of a lot of these areas, not all of it, obviously. But then you had Theresa May doing it. Then you had Boris Johnson also falling for the same agenda and narrative. He also became the prince of net zero. To be fair, even as a London mayor, he was a green mayor anyway. He was a liberal green, and he was pushing for the same things, but not as hard as he did as Prime Minister. And he kept coming out to say, well, we have to make sure all these policies are pragmatic. But then he was completely saying yes to everything that the COP conferences and the Davos conferences were saying. And it makes no sense why he would say one thing to the public and do the exact opposite. So that happened, right? Now we have the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, announcing another £20 billion worth of spending, to do what? Carbon capture. Yes. Carbon capture and storage, £20 billion of your money. Now, of course, the green industries are welcoming this. The green lobby are very excited about this, saying that, well, this £20 billion spending, we're going to call it an investment so that it sounds nicer, because the whole thing is going to go into the UK carbon capture and storage, as what we say, CCS, and a renewed commitment to progressing nuclear through small modular reactors, the SMRs. The only reason they included the nuclear was to minimize the backlash, essentially, to say, hey, I know we are going green nuttery, but at least we are going to be in favor of nuclear a little bit. So, okay, I'm not against it, fair enough. But what about the rest of the agenda? This is where I have a problem. So it gets worse, much worse. UK homeowners face jail or £15,000 in fines in this new energy bill crackdown. The new energy bill suggests the potential 1 year imprisonment and £15,000 fine. So what? I mean, are you kidding me with this? So it's currently under consideration, includes provisions for imposing penalties on homeowners who do not comply with newly introduced energy performance regulations. And those penalties encompass imprisonment of up to 1 year or fines amounting to £15,000. The proposals have generated debate from MPs. If it's a choice between £15,000 and 1 year imprisonment, I will choose 1 year imprisonment because first it's just about the principle. And also, £15,000 is a lot of money. I'd rather just be in prison, get free food for a year and come back out. So, but again, they're not going to stop. They're going to force you again to pay. And you refuse, then you're going to go back to jail. The whole thing is completely tyrannical and is run by idiots because they're not even competent dictators. These people are not even competent tyrants. They don't have the practice for that. They're a bunch of idiots who are going ahead, listening to the green lobby money. And anybody who's an expert, having these meetings with them, with the public affairs consultants and all the lobbyists, saying, we know what we're doing. This is a brief, Minister. You don't have to know anything about it, but we're just going to give you the bullet points. You can go on TV and pretend to know what you're talking about. This is how our democracy is being run right now. And then they say, well, how do we know the public like this? We're going to organize a focus group. We're going to have our surveys and we're going to know the exact answer because we're going to conduct it in a certain way. And we're going to have it as evidence that we've done consultation, public consultation. The whole thing is based on a lie. Anyway, there was a reaction from Craig McKinley. McKinley and Jacob Rees-Mogg have been leading this rebellion. First, let's go to Craig McKinley.
But energy performance regulations may provide for criminal offences with imprisonment for up to 12 months.
What?
Now, I'm appealing to the Speaker to allow my amendment to actually take this out of the bill. Now, let me give you an example. I don't know about you, but I rather like Shawshank Redemption, a great film. It's in my top 10 list. Just imagine the old lags of the future, and they're discussing around the dinner table. Well, what are you in for? Oh, well, I did a benefit fraud of 50 grand, got 8 months. Well, what about you? Oh, dangerous driving, caused serious injury, I got 6 months. Well, what about you? Oh, well, I lost my business, home's gone, family's disappeared, I had to put 20 people out of work, all because I didn't have the energy performance certificate required, and I got 12 months. I mean, I'm a conservative for freedom, not to put people in prison for not adhering to this new net zero religion. This is a horrific bill.
I mean, firstly, the principle of imprisoning people, that's just insanity, right? But the length of it is also fascinating, comparing to a lot of other offences that you will be there for about 6 months, as Craig said, or a couple of months or a few weeks. This is just completely crazy stuff. And now we have some reaction from the so-called Conservative Party, but of course Rishi Sunak's cabinet don't really care about any of those people either. Jacob Rees-Mogg is leading this rebellion, as I said, with Craig McKinley and a few others, and they have big platforms. Rees-Mogg has a show on GB News, yet the influence clearly is not working.
It gives the power to the government to criminalise people in future for not following regulations with minimal parliamentary oversight. What do I mean by this? Well, when New Labour was at its height, it was creating new criminal offences day after day. And the Conservatives at that point and the House of Lords argued that it was wrong to create criminal offences without a full parliamentary process. Now the energy bill is going to make it possible to create criminal offences by a quick route. This is constitutionally wrong.
This is also a very, very good point from Jacob, because one side of it is just common sense, that you shouldn't really arrest people just because they're not going ahead with your agenda, right? Because it's not the same as income tax, for example. And I'm also against income tax based on principle, but those sort of things are already a consensus in the country. And if you refuse to pay income tax, of course, the police will come, put a gun to your head and take you to prison. But with the net zero agenda, this is exactly the fault of people like Theresa May and Boris Johnson and many others who not only promoted it. Promotion of these agendas is not the first problem. The main fundamental issue is that they turned it into legislation, legal obligation. Now, we got international law, we already had that, which I didn't really care about, but then they turned it into domestic law as well. So the rule of law now exists. Now you have to follow it, unless somebody goes in there in the house and scrap the whole thing. And right now, Jacob Rees-Mogg makes a good point, because morally aside, that's a crazy idea, it's also constitutionally questionable. You cannot have the government making things a public offence, a criminal offence, without the supervision of Parliament. And I know we're not really that into the House of Commons these days, because a lot of the MPs are also cuckoo, but principally speaking, when it comes to the constitution, the Parliament is the final frontier. Even when we have terrible MPs, it's still the last chance we have to hold the government to account based on the constitution that we have. So if you completely get rid of that supervision, that's what Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt planning to do, then there is absolutely no point in having democracy. There's absolutely no point in electing MPs in the future. This is where we are now. Now, UK households could be forced, by the way, to have smart appliances in quest for net zero. The government says technology is essential to cope with the opposite fluctuations in electricity supply during the transition to renewables. They keep saying the transition is going towards renewables. Then they come out and say, by the way, we're also investing some in nuclear power. Then why? We know you're going to go full on renewables. Why are you even pretending to be pro-nuclear when you're not going to do anything about it? That's one thing. Secondly, forcing people. Thirdly, technology. Technology was supposed to be an organic element when it comes to human progress over the last century or so. What we've had is a centralized politicians and governments took over the agenda. We had the Industrial Revolution over 100 years ago. That created a lot of benefits and, of course, a lot of issues as well, but it was organic. Then you had, going forward, government after government centralizing things, using the industrial agenda, and now technology. Since the late 20th century, with the internet and more data-driven technology and everything else, they are now taking over from digital currencies to digital IDs to surveillance to your public health apps, NHS apps. Every single thing will be controlled by the state. This is no longer private enterprise. This is no longer individual citizens coming up with technological powers to help humanity. This is governments using those powers against humanity. So this is why the constitution is important to be protected, even though it's not codified, which is also a big issue in the 21st century. Now, we have some reactions over the last day or two on this channel. Let's go to some of the comments you guys have sent us. David said, net zero is a non-achievable pipe dream. The only people that find it achievable are politicians, and we all know that they do not have the brains of a rocking horse. The more ridiculous these unachievable targets, the more money the corrupt, lying, incompetent politicians can steal from the public purse. That comment was from David. We also have another one from Simon saying, well, crazy net zero policies and the DEI rules have burned through all the money. Surprise, surprise. This is in reference to what happened in Birmingham City Council going bankrupt. Simon said, this is just a taster. Wait until Labour gets into power and bankrupt the whole country with more of the same. Yeah, let's not forget what happened in Birmingham, which we did a video. I did a video yesterday analysing the whole thing, because it's not what you heard on the corporate media. That's just bull crap. And this is actually about the fundamental issue of the left-wing mentality of these local authorities. Now we're going to have the same thing with national government. Not to say that the Tory government has been conservative. They've also been socialist anyway, so, or at least liberal. And so we're going to have the same thing over and over again. Anyway, next. The communist 15-minute cities will not work. The uproar over migration and ULEZ is already insane. Imagine them trying to turn a country built on democracy into a communist land with no freedom. That's like trying to convert China and North Korea into democratic liberalist nations. It would just be a disaster and won't work. Net zero, LGBTQ, etc. Is basically just a giant S-show that are already failed projects. The Schwabbers will not win in the end. I do love the Schwabbers thing. Yes, Klaus Schwabbers, the supporters of Schwab. But that's a good point. I've been saying this. They're not going to win. They're not even going to achieve their goals. In the process, we are going to be hurt and damaged. So I'm not going to say, oh, they're going to lose because we are winning. No, we're also going to be damaged throughout the whole process while the centralized control freaks continue with the liberal globalist agenda. Anyway, all these ideas will continue to be challenged by this channel. Thanks for all the support you've been showing us. I'm Tousi, and we are the media.